So now we come to the time to talk about some classical creation myths. Although you'll see that I've got creation there in scare quotes, because that's probably not the best word to use here. That word creation is one that in 21st century Western culture we're used to because of the influence of Judeo-Christian stories on our own perception of the origins of the universe. Whether we believe those stories or not, we live in a culture which has been shaped by those stories. And so we tend to use this word creation to talk about the origin of the universe. But that word creation may not be the best word to use here because that word creation implies something. If you have a creation, then that implies that you have a creator, you see. That you have somebody outside the creation who's responsible for creating what's inside the creation. And that notion is completely foreign, certainly to most of the creation stories that come out of the ancient world. And a better word to use for creation would be the birth of the universe. The birth of the universe, the birth of the gods. And in fact, I want to talk about some vocabulary words here for you. Cosmology, cosmogony, and theogony. Cosmology is a branch of physics which studies the origin of the physical universe. It's a scientific field which studies where the physical world came from. Cosmogony is a word that comes out of mythology, the study of myth. Cosmos, that's the first part of both of those words, means the universe, the physical universe that we live in. This physical, material universe that you and I live in, that we experience with our bodies, that we experience with our five senses, that we taste, touch, see, smell, and hear. This physical universe. Cosmology is the logos, the study of the origin of the cosmos. Cosmogony has to do with the birth of the cosmos. In the same way, theogony has to do with the birth of the gods. That GN part of the of cosmogony and theogony has to do with birth. That's an old Proto-Indo-European root that means that has to do with women, that has to do with production, which has to do with birth. A gynecologist, for example, is a doctor who specializes in women's health. An engineer, the GN words there, what engineers do, they produce things. A gentleman, originally, in the original use of that word gentleman, meant someone who was born to a high family. The GN part of gentle, a gentle family, was once meant a high-class family. A gentleman was someone born into a high-class family. What else is there out there? Genius. You don't go to school to learn how to become a genius, right? Genius is what you're born with, a native intelligence, the intelligence that you're born with, and the GN part of genius indicates a birth in that sense. So the GN Proto-Indo-European root shows up quite a bit in words having to do with birthing, with productivity, and with as an allusion to women. Just kind of an interesting use of that Proto-Indo-European root there. Well, if we back up just a second, I told you that that word creation involves somebody outside the system, outside of creation, who is active in forming what is created. But the way that the Greeks thought about things and the way that most people in the ancient world, and certainly the ancient Mediterranean world, this would include the ancient Greeks, the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Babylonians, Sumerians, ancient Hittites, saw the universe as being born out of chaos. Now, the use of this word chaos has changed over time. Today, in English, when we say chaos, we mean confusion or things that are a jumble or like things on the back shelf back there that I still haven't organized years after bringing them into this room. Those shelves back there, we would say, are in chaos, all right? But for the Greeks, chaos meant emptiness. In fact, the Greek word kosmoto is the origin of our English word chasm, in emptiness, like a giant yawning. And in fact, the Greek word for chasm is the same as the Greek word for yawning. A great big giant yawn, a great big emptiness that somehow gives birth to the universe. The universe being born out of nothing, out of emptiness. It doesn't sound very scientific, does it? It doesn't sound like 20th, 21st century physics now, does it? Or maybe it does. Have you heard of the Big Bang? This huge nothingness that something happened where there's a big explosion of nothing, and then the Big Bang just sort of erupts and everything is thrown out. Especially you'll see in this diagram the planet Earth, because that's the most important part of the universe, I guess. The Big Bang, out of chaos, emptiness, yawning, everything is produced. Doesn't quite sound terribly scientific, the way that we think about science and its exalted position in 21st century Western culture. The Big Bang was, actually, the idea of the Big Bang was the invention of a Roman Catholic priest who was also a physicist, who was teaching at a university in Belgium, where Father Lemaitre, that's my best approximation of the French there. I'm not trying to be make fun of the man's name. But Father Lemaitre came up with the idea, he's a very well-known physicist, of the Big Bang as a way of saying, what God did, even though we can't say God because we're scientists, so we'll just say what started the universe, we'll just call it Big Bang, and everybody will just kind of wink at each other, and it's a way of getting around the problem that, how did all this stuff around us come from nothing? Well, the Greeks didn't spend any time, trying to cover it up or anything. They just, as a part of their story, has the universe being born out of nothing, born out of chaos.